The day my stepmother set fire to my mother's diary, the house smelled like sugar and smoke, and something I had no name for yet. My name is Tess Calder. I was 28, back in the blue clapboard house where I grew up, standing in the kitchen doorway while Margot, in her cream blouse and careful lipstick, fed my mother's life to the flames. The diary's spine flexed in her tongs, pages flared, and words lifted as ash. It was July, the windows open, curtains breathing in and out with the sea wind from Harrow Cove. My father had died 2 months earlier after a fall on the jetty, and grief had made everything both louder and farther away. I felt like someone had moved the ground 2 inches to the left and forgot to tell me. "This is for your own good," Margot said. Her voice was practiced grace. "You can't keep living inside old pages." I could hear the gulls arguing over the dock. I heard my pulse. I heard that soft whisper that comes before a storm. My mother's diary had lived in the top dresser drawer since I was 11, tucked inside a pillowcase, smelling faintly of lilacs. She died when I was 16, and the diary was what I had left of her voice, the way she folded time into sentences, the way she let herself be small on some days and wise on others. My father had married Margot 3 years after the funeral. He loved her briskness, her neat hair, the way she filled the pantry with labeled jars. I learned the edges of her quickly. She preferred white peonies to roses. She thought crying was private. She said my mother was kind, then always added, but fragile, as if that was a flaw that forgave many things. I did not break when the first book went in. I did not plead. My chest lifted and fell, my hands stayed at my sides. I asked one question, because questions were the one habit my mother left me besides the diary itself. "Why?" I said. Margot looked at me like a teacher correcting a child. "Your father wanted you to move forward. These journals, they keep you chained to the past. They were messy, Tess. They weren't good for you." She meant they weren't good for her. She meant the house should not hold anything that made her a second wife. She meant control, disguised as concern. The fire snapped as a ribbon of glue found heat. I pictured my mother's slanted handwriting, the way she looped her Y's like small swimming fish. I pictured the summer she saved me from the undertow, her hands on my shoulders, saying, "Breathe now, breathe here." The diary had those days, and it had the hard days too, when money ran thin, when she missed her teaching job after chemo took her strength, when she wrote that the tide kept stealing her balance. She was not fragile. She lived with her eyes open. I thought of my father, the way grief turned him into a quieter man. He should have stopped this. He was gone. The house, with its quiet and its goals, made a decision in the silence. I could have lunged for the fireplace. I could have made a scene. But my mother taught me that some fights are won with steadiness. I let Margot finish. I watched every last page curl and blacken until the diary was a nest of embers, collapsing in on itself like a breath held too long. "Good," she said, laying the tongs down, smoothing her blouse. "That's done." I nodded and walked upstairs. In my old room, the air was warmer, dust floating like bright minnows in the afternoon light. I opened the closet, moved my winter coats, and reached behind the shoebox labeled "Camp." Under the lid were zippered plastic sleeves, each holding a thin sheaf, each numbered in pencil. On the top one I had written, 3 years ago, in my neatest hand, Diary, Book 1. Archival copy. I lifted the sleeves, felt the weight of paper saved from a different fire, one that had started long before Margot struck her match. The realization was not loud. It was a tide turning. I sat on the floor, closed my eyes, and knew that endings sometimes arrive long after they start. The first spark of it touched my ribs, a small, steady heat. After the fire, the house changed its temperature. Margot began closing doors. She retyped my father's lists and pinned them on corkboards, as if he had simply gone upstairs and left his handwriting to be replaced. She put the blue enamel mixing bowl in the donation box because it was chipped, and she purged the old mugs with my mother's favorite chipped blue included, like it was a kindness. Neighbors came with pies and condolences that turned to gossip in their cars. People said Margot was practical. People said I was having trouble letting go. Harrow Cove had a way of holding on to rumors like seaweed holds to pilings. I went for early runs along the beach to breathe air my lungs could understand. I lined up the archival sleeves on my bed and counted twice, 3 times, listening to the zip and sigh of plastic as if that sound could steady the room. I worked as a library assistant in town. The stacks were a cathedral of quiet. I returned books to their shelves and watched the patrons speak in hushed voices, a chorus of the living moving around me. At lunch I sat in the staff room with the window cracked so I could hear the flag cable ping against the pole. I kept my phone face down. I did not tell anyone that Margot had burned my mother's diary. In small towns, some stories need careful weather. At night I stayed in the guest room, because Margot wanted my old room for a craft space. She moved her sewing machine onto my desk and folded fabrics with a precise hand, as if arranging was the same thing as belonging. She sent emails to the estate lawyer and copied me, using phrases like efficient resolution and minimal delays. She wanted the house transferred into her name. She wanted clean lines. "You have your own life, Tess," she said one evening, standing in the doorway with a glass of white wine. "It isn't healthy to be stuck here." "My father wanted me here," I said. "He said I could take time." "He wanted you to be happy," she replied, eyes bright with the gentleness she wore like perfume. "You think this house is where happiness lives?" I didn't answer because I knew she would turn any word into an argument. I went for another run under the streetlights, my breath a metronome. The moon was a thin coin. I thought about my mother sitting at the kitchen table after midnight, writing in her diary while the house slept. She would often tap the end of the pen against her lip. She would stand at the sink, listen to the night, and write the word enough on the corner of a page. She wrote to keep herself honest. The diary pages I had saved were not a secret of cruelty, they were a record of one woman's days, stitched with love, fatigue, and intelligence. They were also something else, though I did not know it fully yet. They held names and dates. They held numbers. In the months before she died, my mother had become very specific. I was quiet in my grief, which made some people assume I was finished with it. That is the mistake people make about quiet things. They think quiet means empty, when it can mean full, or firm, or gathering. The whisper started. Margot mentioned to a friend at the market that I had emotional attachments to objects. That phrase bloomed. I found a box on the porch with a note, "Free the past to live the future." Inside were 3 aspiration board magazines and a candle that smelled like almond frosting. At the library, I learned the weight of patience. I watched an old man teach his grandson to read by tracing the words with a finger, slow and serious. I took that slowness home. I cleaned the guest room and put the archival sleeves in a wooden crate under the bed. I labeled the spine. I backed up the scanned copies on a USB drive, then on another, then on a cloud folder with a plain name that meant nothing to anyone else. One night in late August, I stood at the kitchen window while Margot stirred a pot of soup. Her back was to me, straight and small. "You know," she said, "your mother would want you to be strong." "I am," I said. She glanced at the dark square of the glass where my face floated faintly over the lawn. "Then prove it. Let go." I felt the vow rise with the steam, not to fight in the way she wanted, not to match noise with noise, but to keep what was true intact. I set my phone on the counter, opened the Notes app, and typed a sentence, "I will hold what she wrote until the day comes to open it." I did not know yet when that day would be. I only knew it was moving toward me, like a tide you learn to read by the pull on your ankles. September brought the far sound of school buses and cooler mornings. The sea took on that slate color it gets before storms, and the gulls grew sharper in their flights. At the library, a man named Daniel started coming in on Tuesdays. He was in his mid-30s, neatly dressed, with the quiet humor of someone who has listened for a living. I recognized his name on a mailer in my stack, War and Hale, attorneys at law. He asked for titles on probate procedure, which made me think of the universe's low appetite for coincidence. We spoke in the tone of the building, soft, measured, factual. After the third Tuesday I made a decision that felt like sliding a key into a lock I had been carrying for years. "Can I ask a general question?" I said, sliding his books across the desk. "General is my favorite kind," he said. "If a family member destroys personal writings after a death," I asked, "do those pages have any standing, if there were copies?" He didn't flinch. "Were they relevant to assets or intent?" "I don't know yet," I said. But my mother was precise. "Then they might," he said. "If the copies are verifiable." I went home with the lightness that follows a name given to a problem. That night I opened the sleeves and found the change I'd only sensed. In the final 4 months of entries, my mother had inserted pages more like ledgers than letters. Expenses, account numbers, a note, speak to H, or about the house. I paused, then read it again. My mother had met with Daniel's father, whose name still hung on the firm's door with the new paint. The date was 2 weeks before she went into hospice. I lifted an envelope taped to the inside back cover of the last diary. It was addressed in her hand to me, not in a sentimental flourish, but with the stillness of something necessary. The seal had been broken, maybe by me years back, maybe by the need to feel her voice again, but I had tucked it away untouched since. I slid out one page. "Tess. If you are reading this, I am somewhere I cannot stand in your doorway and tell you these things out loud. Our house is paid for. Your father and I agreed, after talking with Mr. Orr, that whatever happens with remarriage or money, the Harrow Cove house is to be yours or held in trust for you. The paperwork is in Mr. Orr's files. Take these pages if you need them. Tell whoever needs telling that a home is a promise, and I made it to you. Mom." I placed the letter on the bed as if it might bruise. The room held its breath. There was no drama in the sentence, only intent, like a straight line drawn with a steady hand. My heart went very quiet, which is the body's way of making room for a new truth. The next morning I took the letter and a few sleeves to the library and asked Daniel if he had a minute. We stepped into the small conference room where patrons sometimes filled out applications for passports. The blinds cut the light into gentle bars across the table. "I know your father's name," I said, and told him about the note, the diaries, the fire. He read the letter twice. He did not make the soft sounds people make to signal sympathy, which made me like him immediately. He asked for dates, for the sleeve numbers, for a list of anything my mother referenced by name. He asked to borrow copies, not originals. He spoke without hurry. "My father is retired," he said, "but I can check the archives. If your mother and father executed a memorandum with him and filed it properly, it changes the shape of the estate. It may have been missed, or misplaced. We will proceed as if it exists, until we confirm." "Margot burns things," I said. "She calls it tidying." "Then we will be grateful for your habit of saving," he said. I walked home with the light sharpened around the edges of things. I did not picture victory, because that was not the point. I pictured alignment. My mother had written down a promise. I had lifted it out of the flame. Now, I would place it where paper can speak in rooms built for listening. The resolve was not a hard knot. It was a firm hand holding a thread. We met in the front room of Orr and Hale on a Thursday that smelled like rain. The walls were lined with black and white photos of the harbor before the new pier was built. The conference table was a warm rectangle. Daniel sat with a case file open, his notes precise. Margot arrived in her cream blouse with a silk scarf and a smile for the receptionist that did not reach her eyes. She sat across from me and placed a hand on the folder she brought, like a woman about to teach a class. "Let's keep this simple," she said. "The house should be mine. I was your father's wife." Daniel cleared his throat once, a quiet bell. "And we will keep it simple," he said. "We're here to review documents. Emotions are understandable, but paper will lead us." He slid a photocopy across the table. "This is a 2018 memorandum from my father's files," he said. "Your mother and father agreed that the Harrow Cove property would pass to Tess upon either of their deaths, with a life estate available to the surviving spouse upon mutual consent. It appears the memorandum was drafted, signed, and referenced in a letter to their primary attorney. That letter was never countermanded in the subsequent revisions made after remarriage." Margot's smile turned to something else. "That can't be right. We updated everything." "You updated the will," Daniel said, "but this memorandum remains in effect. It's not uncommon for a specific property agreement to persist alongside a will, unless explicitly revoked. We also have supporting evidence." He placed my mother's letter on the table in a clear sleeve, alongside photocopies of her ledger pages and the scanned emails my father had sent confirming an appointment with H.R. The room made a sound like a string pulled taut and then held steady. Margot's voice thinned. "Your mother was ill, Tess. She wasn't thinking clearly." I kept my hand still. "She was exact," I said. "She was fragile," Margot replied, and the word landed the way a drawer slams. Daniel's gaze did not move from the documents. "We have signatures, dates, and my father's contemporaneous notes," he said. Tess's mother understood her intent, and Mr. Calder concurred at the time. "There's room for negotiation on practicalities, but the direction is clear." Margot's scarf shifted, a small bird settling. "So what happens?" she asked, voice clipped. "We formalize the transfer of title to Tess," Daniel said, "and we can discuss a short-term occupancy plan for you, if Tess agrees. No one is being put on the street today. But the property is not yours to claim." Silence moved through the room with slow feet. I could feel the tides pull again, the way it rearranges sand under your shoes. Margot looked at me like she was deciding whether to break something in her hands. "You set me up to look cruel," she said. "You saved those pages just to corner me." "No," I said. "I saved my mother's voice because it mattered. The rest came from the way truth waits." Her mouth tightened. "You're ungrateful." "I'm steady," I said. "We signed what could be signed that day." Daniel's pen made a clean sound against the paper. The receptionist brought water in thick glasses that looked like the ones from my mother's kitchen. Margot folded her scarf with surgical precision and rose to leave without touching me. On the sidewalk, the rain had begun, soft as breath. She paused under the awning and looked at me the way someone looks at a locked door that used to open. "You'll regret this," she said, not loudly. I shook my head. "I won't." There was no triumph, only alignment. I walked into the rain without my umbrella, because the air felt honest. The justice lived in the documents and the way we had placed them in the light. No one shouted. No one was dragged away. The room had made space for the past to speak, and then we let the quiet be the judge. In the weeks that followed, the house began to sound like itself again. Early sunlight pressed small squares onto the hallway floor through the old window panes. The kettle whistled and I lifted it with the practiced hand of a person who has measured grief and found a rhythm underneath. I opened the windows and let the October air cross the rooms, carrying the salt of the harbor and a little scent of wood smoke from the town. Margot moved to a rental near the green, where the realtor's flyers promised light and convenience. We exchanged 3 emails, each short, each polite. I offered to hold a few boxes for her until she settled. She declined with a thank you that did not try to rewrite the past. Quiet has a way of editing people's lines for them. I did not restore the house to a shrine. I kept my mother's chair by the window where the afternoon warms the fabric. I donated the duplicates of things we never used. I painted the craft room walls a subdued gray and moved my desk back in, the wood nicked by time. I placed the archival sleeves in a flat file cabinet with acid-free folders, labeled not as relics, but as an active record. On the top shelf I set the letter in a framed sleeve, the handwriting steady and familiar, not as a weapon, but as a promise fulfilled. At the library, I asked my manager if I could start a Saturday workshop on personal archiving. She smiled like someone being handed an umbrella just as rain begins. 12 people showed up the first week, a fisherman with boxes of Polaroids, a nurse with recipe cards, a boy holding a shoebox of letters from his grandfather. We talked about acid-free paper, clear sleeves, scanning, and naming files in ways the future can understand. We talked about why keeping is not hoarding when it is an act of care. Daniel dropped by once with a donation of binders and a stack of gently used sleeves. He stood at the back for a few minutes, then left without interrupting. Later, he sent an email. If you ever want to write a guide for clients on preserving evidence of intent, our firm would sponsor the printing. I replied with a simple thank you and attached a draft. One morning I found a volunteer rose blooming where my mother's garden used to be, a small red flare against the fence. It had climbed up from some old root, patient and private, waiting until the light reached it at the right angle. I fetched the pruning shears and tended it with the careful conviction of a person who knows what survives fire. Neighbors began to recalibrate their opinions. In the grocery aisle, Mrs. Larkin said, "I heard you handled things with grace." I nodded and asked after her husband's back, and the conversation floated into ordinary waters. The gossip turned into something softer, as if a wind had shifted. People like the myth of a fight. They are less interested in the art of a careful correction. That is fine. I am interested in what stays repaired. When I think of the day of the fire now, I remember not the smoke, but the sound the pages made, a soft hiss like the surf pulling away from pebbles. I think of my mother's words, their exactness, the way she trusted paper to carry meaning past her body. She gave me a way to hold grief without letting it hold me. She taught me that love can be practical and fierce at once, like a door you oil every year so it keeps swinging open without complaint. I walk the beach in the early hours when the tide is low, and I say my mother's name under my breath the way you sharpen a pencil. Sometimes I see Margot on the green, carrying a cloth bag of vegetables, her hair still neat. We nod. I do not wish her harm. I wish her clarity. She wanted clean lines. We have them now. On my desk sits a new notebook. Not a diary the size of a brick, not a record of every ache, but a ledger of small good things, the rose, the workshop, the neighbor who left a jar of marmalade on the porch with a note that said, "A sweet for steady hands." I write in it at the end of the day with a pen that glides, and I leave room on each page for tomorrow. Some nights, the house holds a quiet that feels like a friend breathing beside you. I brew tea, turn off the lamp, and stand at the window watching the harbor lights blink. Justice was not thunder. It was a hinge swinging back into place, a line drawn straight because the ruler did not bend. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. And subscribe for more stories of quiet revenge.